Hey everybody, it's Bill Houston with the Bill Houston Podcast. This is the Merrimack Valley tube trailer theory video. I'm going to be reading from a report which you can get online, and it's called The BlackSwan at Merrimack Valley, and you can get a copy by going to tinyurl.com/BlackSwan Merrimack Valley intro. That's tinyurl.com/BlackSwan Merrimack Valley intro.
Breaking news outside Boston, dozens of chain reaction gas explosions across several communities. And here's ABC's David Wright.
North of Boston tonight, more than 50 fires and explosions so far, apparently caused by a gas main explosion.
I was in shock. I started running down the street.
At least 6 people have been hospitalized. In Lawrence, fire crews are responding to more than 24 fires across the city. In North Andover and Andover, officials are urging all residents to evacuate. The area roads gridlocked.
If you have not evacuated, you just gotta go.
According to the state fire marshal, a surge in the gas main started all this. The Columbia Gas Company says it was doing work on the lines when the explosions occurred. The local power company now says it has cut off power to the entire area as a precaution.
Now, the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, has issued a preliminary report which includes a theory. And the theory was first revealed on September 15th, 2018. And there's a couple of problems with this theory. The first is that there's a map. And the map includes a list of affected locations. And now this list of affected locations is a subset of previously identified sites. And so there are other sites that are silently dropped. Another problem is the NTSB does not mention the presence of a critical SCADA alarm, SCADA, SCADA alarm, necessary to confirm their theory. The absence of this alarm would tend to refute the NTSB theory. So the biggest question that I have with the NTSB theory is as follows. Can the NTSB theory explain what was observed in Merrimack Valley? And I say the answer to that is no. And I'm going to offer an explanation which might explain the event which was observed. New untested experimental equipment has begun to be deployed to natural gas local distribution systems, which I believe could have caused the event which was observed if a certain malfunction or human error occurs. And this is what I would call tube trailers. Tube trailers in use as pressure boosters. Now then, let me just show you what I am looking at really quickly. So here is a list of acknowledgments. I especially want to appreciate the contributions of my friend Craig Stevens and also these other leaders who have helped me either reviewing draft copies of this document or supported my work in other ways. Nicole Dillingham, Marty Kearns, Barbara Arundale, Bob Ackley, and also other people who have contributed to this work, and that is Vera Scroggins, Keith Shue, Raymond Kimball, Dennis Higgins, and also I want to thank my friend Dr. Anthony Ingraffia for verifying a key fact. And I just want to say that I, William Houston, am solely responsible for the content of this report. So what was the Merrimack Valley event? On September 13th, 2018, while contractors for Columbia Gas of Massachusetts, a local distribution company, or LDC, were performing maintenance activities in South Lawrence, Massachusetts. And that's when excessive pressure in the system caused a series of explosions and fires in at least 131 structures, including more than 100 homes. And by the way, this is all footnoted if you get a copy of the report. One young man was killed when a home exploded and the chimney collapsed and landed on the car he was sitting in. He had just received his driver's license.
Well, Emily, we're still on our way to the Lawrence area, but I just got off the phone with the police chief. I mean, that is a staggering number. He's counting up, about 20 to 25 fires in Lawrence, and then an additional 20 to 25 fires in the North Andover area. So that brings the number to as many as 50, which is just remarkable. And, those are just 2 or 3 communities. He says that these problems also could extend into Boxford. So we're talking a wide swath of the Merrimack Valley here. And the thought is that it was some sort of gas surge that went down the line, sort of community by community. I am no expert, on gas lines in this area and exactly how that would work, but that's how first responders are treating this, some sort of, gas surge or something through the gas lines that's causing all of this trouble. But it is widespread. And these police departments, these fire departments, these first responders stretched thin. They're calling all the day shift people back to try to deal with this. We're on 495 now, and ambulances going by from another community, so everyone rushing to this area to try to help out. But obviously a very serious situation as they try to get a control of all of these fires.
Yeah, absolutely, John. All right, so safely make your way there when you can. We'll check back in with you.
Now, over 30,000 people were forced to initially evacuate, and within the affected area, there were 8,570 gas meters, each associated with a gas customer. An additional 10,000 customers also lost gas service. As of November 22, when this report was first written, 7,500 people were still displaced and in temporary housing. Now then, by any measure, this was a high consequence event. This is something I like to study, is high consequence events, and work on preventing those things. The Merrimack Valley event was unprecedented in terms of scale in over 80 years of natural gas local distribution systems under city streets, providing gas service into homes. And I would say this event was orders of magnitude larger than any prior event. Now, the NTSB, in their September 15th briefing, the third media briefing, the investigative team led by Chairman Sumwalt first advanced a theory that this overpressurization event was caused by utility contractors failing to relocate sense lines. Let me just play for you to make it easier. I'm just going to play for you Chairman Sumwalt explaining this theory. Here it is.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Robert Sumwalt. I'm the chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, and joining us today, my colleague on the board, member Jennifer Homendy, and the investigator in charge for this accident, Roger Evans. Since the beginning of this event on Thursday afternoon, people have been referring to this as an overpressure situation. And the NTSB can confirm at this time that this was indeed an overpressure situation. By way of background, gas is supposed to flow to their customers at about 1/2 psi. We believe that the gas did indeed flow into homes at significantly greater flow rates and pressure. The real question for this investigation is to answer why this occurred. Yesterday, I mentioned that there were 14 regulators in this area, in these neighborhoods. 14 regulators. They are located in underground vaults. And let me tell you what we found today regarding one regulator, which is located at Winthrop and South Union Streets. We found that pressure sensors were connected to a pipe that was being taken out of service on Thursday. So let me explain the regulator. Basically, there's an underground regulator, and truthfully, it's 2 regulators, a primary and a backup. I'll just refer to it as the regulator. Natural gas flows into one side of the regulator at about 75 psi. by the time it goes through the regulator, it's supposed to come out at 1/2 psi. A low gas pressure situation is not a good situation. A low pressure is not a good situation for a gas utility company, because if it gets too low, you lose service to the customers. Pilot lights go out, and it is quite an effort to go around and relight hundreds, if not thousands, of pilot lights. So that's a situation they don't want to occur. So there are pressure sensors, flow sensors, that monitor the downstream pressure and flow rate from these regulators. If the flow rate and pressure get too low, it will signal to the regulator to open up the valve to allow more flow. It is like the thermostat in your home for heating. If the temperature sensor senses that the temperature is too cold, what does it do? It sends a signal to turn on the heat. And that's what happens here. If the system senses that the pressure or the flow rate is too low, it sends a signal to open up the regulator to allow a higher pressure and greater flow rate. We found evidence from an evidentiary dig this morning that pressure sensors that were attached to a gas line were actually attached to a gas line that was being capped off and taken out of service on Thursday. So let me repeat that. We found evidence from an evidentiary dig this morning that pressure sensors were attached to a gas line that was being placed out of service and being capped off on Thursday. Certainly the investigation will answer two questions. What effect, if any, did this have on the overpressure situation? And secondly, why was this sensor connected to a gas line that was being placed out of service? Just for your information, the regulator that's in the ground is located at South Union and Winthrop Street. There was a construction site where they were capping off this pressure line about 7 blocks away at South Union and Salem Streets.
So that was Chairman Sumwalt with the National Transportation Safety Board. Now, I have several concerns with the NTSB preliminary report. First, there was a map that was provided on this November 10th, 2018 preliminary report. Now, the NTSB map omits several sites of fires or explosions previously identified by by various sources, including the Massachusetts State Police, the Boston Globe, and/or the Eagle Tribune. Now, next, the NTSB mentions that the SCADA control system in Columbus, Ohio, received 2 high-pressure alarms starting at 4:04 p.m. Now, let me first say that SCADA, S-C-A-D-A, stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. And this is the system of telemetry that they use to monitor and control the pipeline remotely. The NTSB mentions that there were 2 high-pressure alarms, which we would expect, and that's good, starting at 4:04 p.m. Now, I believe that there should have been a corresponding high flow rate alarm coming from the source, which is the Methuen City Gate. Now, the NTSB does not mention this crucial detail, which is really necessary to confirm their theory. If there was no such corresponding alarm, then this should be reported, as it could indicate that the source of the pressure surge was someplace other than the Methuen City Gate. And this would be unexpected according to the NTSB theory. Now next, and this is the most important thing I believe, that I do not believe the NTSB theory first advanced in their third briefing on September 16th and then reiterated in their preliminary report can possibly explain what was observed for the following reasons. Number 1, the NTSB theory affects a single regulator between a 75 psi distribution main and the 0.5 psi low pressure segment. This theory would be plausible if a single low pressure segment was impacted. However, upon information and belief, at least 14 low pressure segments were affected, covering an impact radius of somewhere between 2 miles and 3 miles. And the area is going to be between 15 square miles and 30 square miles. Now, according to Bob Ackley of Gas Safety USA, it's fairly common for these low-pressure segments to be dual feed, which means they're sourced by multiple independent regulators from the distribution main. And this is by design for redundancy. And even still, the NTSB is implicitly suggesting two seemingly unlikely things. One, that all of the low-pressure segments fed by the 14 independent regulators within the impacted area is functionally a single interconnected low-pressure segment, and that this massive pressure surge, which was observed, was conveyed over such a large area, 15 to 30 square miles, via a network of pipes designed for 0.5 psi. I believe both of those things make this theory implausible. I'm going to leave out a lot of details here. I'm going to encourage you to read this report. I'm just going to give you a very high-level view. So let me show you this. These maps here are the various maps. This was the first one that was published on Twitter by the Massachusetts State Police. This one in the upper left-hand corner here, if you can see it. And then the next one, I believe, was the Boston Globe, which was basically, looks like the same map to me. It was just redrawn by the Boston Globe. But I believe the source data was the Massachusetts State Police, because essentially the dots are identical. Next was the Eagle Tribune, which identified a few sites over here that hadn't been previously mentioned. Eagle Tribune mentioned 3 sites that hadn't been mentioned elsewhere. And that was, or 4 sites. These sites in far, I would say, western Lawrence, western part of South Lawrence, and then also this one down in Ballardville. So the next one was North Andover, the North Andover News. And this was on 9/22, and that's when this really strange shape, this green shape here, was introduced. Kind of looks like a dragon or a seahorse, I don't know. It's a Rorschach test. And then this shape was adopted by the NTSB, as we can see here. They use the same shape. The map is a little bit expanded in the x-axis. It's a little bit wider. And then WCVB, actually on 10/18, copied this from the NTSB report. And this is my map. This is a composite showing all of the identified fires from a variety of different sources. And these sites over here by just north of Merrimack College were dropped by the NTSB. And these 3 sites over here identified by the Eagle Tribune, they were also dropped by the NTSB without explanation. And so this is a grouping of sites that were initially identified that in north of the Merrimack River, which is interesting. So let me blow this up so you can see it a little bit better. These sites right here were silently dropped by the NTSB. Now the reason why this is interesting is because there's no way that a 0.5 psi segment, a low pressure segment, is going to cross the river. The only thing that's going to cross the river is the 75 psi distribution main. This is where my theory is different from NTSB. NTSB says the pressure bubble happened along the low pressure side. I say the pressure bubble had to be transmitted by the higher pressure side, the 75 psi side. So if these sites exist, if these sites are real, and these sites were identified by the Massachusetts State Police as the event was unfolding, if these sites are real, it would take the NTSB theory and throw it completely out the window. It would prove that it's wrong. So it's a really important detail if those sites are real or not. This is why NTSB really needs to explain why these sites were dropped. Now, I have a theory as to why these sites were dropped, but I really want to hear it from the NTSB. I don't want to guess. So this reminds me of a joke that my old physics professor used to tell. And he'd say, any data which does not conform to the theory must be discarded. And that's a joke because that's being a dishonest scientist, is when you throw away data if it doesn't conform to your theory. It's a joke. So I really hope, I really do have faith in the NTSB and their thoroughness and their completeness and their professionalism. So I know that the NTSB will acknowledge and follow up on the leads that are presented in this video and will address the concerns that I'm raising here.
Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker declared a state of emergency today in 3 towns north of Boston that were rocked by natural gas explosions yesterday. 1 person was killed. Baker has also removed the local gas company from the emergency response. More now from Kenneth Craig.
It happened without notice during a series of gas explosions and fires yesterday that raced through homes in 3 communities north of Boston. This North Andover family returned home Friday and tried to salvage what they could after their house went up in flames. Louise Buzzino lives next door and knew something was wrong when she heard a noise coming from her basement.
And I knew right away that perhaps I should leave the house. I grabbed my cell phone, came out in the yard, turned my head, and saw that this house was on fire.
In neighboring Lawrence, 18-year-old Lionel Rondon was killed when a chimney from an exploding home slammed into his car. At least 25 others were injured. Dozens of buildings suffered damage.
It looked like Armageddon.
Investigators, led by the NTSB, are trying to figure out how a natural gas line to over 8,500 customers of Columbia Gas became overpressurized, leading to the explosions and fires.
Some residents here have absolutely nothing to come home to, and that includes the man who lives right here in this house. He's actually a local police officer, and he was on duty last night when his own home went up in flames. He rushed home, he made sure his daughter was out safely, and then he started evacuating his fellow neighbors. Dana.